Most people think Meredith Bernard just films a peaceful farm life and calls it a day. But that image barely scratches the surface. Behind the calm sunsets and slow mornings is a woman who walked away from a corporate career, built a real working farm, and turned daily chaos into a growing media brand. From financial risks to internet pressure and moments that tested everything she built, her story is far more complicated than it looks on screen. And once you hear what rarely gets talked about, you'll start seeing this farm wife in a completely different way. Most people assume Meredith Bernard married into farm life and slowly picked it up along the way. That's not how it happened. Before the cows, before the early mornings and dirt under the nails reality, she was on a completely different path. Corporate sales, structured schedules, predictable paychecks, the kind of life where weekends were actually weekends. Walking away from that wasn't romantic, it was risky. When Meredith made the switch, she didn't ease into it. She jumped straight into a world where mistakes are expensive and learning curves are unforgiving. Farming doesn't come with onboarding or safety nets. You either adapt fast or you fall behind. And the pressure hits different when your income depends on things you can't control. Weather, markets, equipment breaking at the worst possible time. What makes this move even more surprising is how visible it became. Most people struggle quietly while figuring things out. Meredith chose to document it. The wins, the confusion, the days that didn't go as planned. That honesty is what pulled people in. But it also locked her into a life where there's no hiding when things get hard. And that choice, to walk away from comfort and build something unpredictable, set the tone for everything that came next. Because the farm wasn't the only risk she was about to take. A lot of viewers picture Meredith's life as a small, slow homestead where everything runs at a gentle pace. That assumption couldn't be further from reality. This isn't a few chickens and a garden tucked behind the house. What Meredith stepped into was a full-scale working operation with real numbers, real costs, and real consequences when something goes wrong. Cattle aren't background scenery, they're responsibility. Each animal represents money, time, and constant decision-making. Feed has to be planned. Hay has to be cut at the right moment. Equipment failures don't just cause inconvenience, they derail entire weeks. And when prices shift or weather refuses to cooperate, there's no pause button to regroup. That's the side of farm life most people don't see through a screen. The days don't slow down just because you're tired. Work doesn't stop because motivation dips. And mistakes don't fade quietly. They show up on balance sheets and sleepless nights. Meredith learned quickly that farming isn't about looking productive. It's about staying ahead of problems before they explode. And while viewers were falling in love with the peaceful visuals, she was juggling logistics, pressure, and risk behind the scenes. Because once the farm reaches that scale, it stops being a lifestyle choice and starts being a business that never clocks out. But managing the land was only half the battle. What she built next would put everything under an even brighter spotlight. Here's where Meredith's story quietly separates from most farm creators. She didn't just turn the camera on and hope people showed up. From the start, she understood that telling the story mattered just as much as living it. And that's a skill most people don't realize she brought with her. While the farm demanded physical labor, Meredith was also building a digital presence with intention. Writing, filming, editing, posting, on top of chores that never wait. The content wasn't random. It followed the rhythm of real life, which made it feel relatable instead of staged. Viewers weren't watching highlights. They were stepping into ongoing chapters. But turning daily life into content comes with pressure no one warns you about. Once people feel connected, they expect access. Miss a post and someone notices? Share too much and criticism rolls in. Share too little and people start guessing. Suddenly, your life isn't just happening. It's being interpreted in real time by thousands of strangers. That's the trade-off most viewers never think about. Meredith didn't just build a following. She built accountability to an audience that feels invested. Every decision, every shift in tone, every quiet moment gets read between the lines. And as the channel grew, so did the expectations. Because when people stop seeing you as a person and start seeing you as a symbol, the margin for mistakes disappears. And that's when things get complicated. By the time Meredith's audience really took off, the conversation around her life started shifting. People weren't just watching anymore, they were projecting. Suddenly, her choices weren't just personal decisions, they became debate topics. How she raised her kids, how she ran her home, how much of her life she shared, and how much she kept private. One detail that quietly changed everything was homeschooling. Meredith has spoken openly about educating her children at home while managing farm work and content creation. To some viewers, that felt inspiring. To others, it triggered assumptions they were never invited to make. Strangers began filling in gaps, attaching labels, and debating a version of her life that existed mostly in their own heads. That's the strange pressure of online visibility. You can be transparent and still misunderstood. You can share your routine and still be accused of hiding something. And once an audience decides you represent an idea, stepping outside that expectation feels like betrayal, even when you've done nothing differently. What makes this even heavier is that Meredith never positioned herself as a spokesperson or a movement. She documented her life as it was. But the internet doesn't always allow that nuance, and when family, faith, and identity collide on a public platform, every quiet decision suddenly feels loud. And just as that pressure peaked, real life stepped in without warning and forced everything into perspective. Just when it felt like the pressure couldn't get heavier, everything changed overnight. A massive storm tore through Meredith's region, turning normal routines into pure survival mode. This wasn't the kind of disruption you wait out, it was the kind that forces you to confront how fragile everything really is. Meredith shared updates as the situation unfolded: damaged land, uncertainty, and the kind of fear that doesn't translate well through a screen. When you live on the land, storms don't just pass through. They take pieces of your work, your plans, and sometimes your sense of control with them. Fields get wrecked, structures don't hold, and recovery isn't measured in days, it stretches into months. What stood out wasn't dramatics, it was the tone shift. The content slowed, the reality set in. Viewers saw less polish and more honesty, including how overwhelming rebuilding can feel when you're responsible for both a family and a livelihood. Meredith also used her platform to push relief efforts, redirecting attention outward instead of inward. Moments like that have a way of stripping everything back to the basics. Algorithms don't matter. Growth doesn't matter. Even criticism fades into the background when you're focused on protecting what's left and figuring out what comes next. But when the dust finally settled, Meredith didn't retreat. She adjusted, and the decision she made afterwards surprised a lot of people, because it showed she was thinking far beyond recovery. After the storm, most people expected Meredith to pull back, simplify, and play it safe. That's usually what survival mode looks like. Instead, she did something unexpected. She expanded, quietly, strategically, and in a way that revealed how differently she thinks about the future. Meredith and her family began talking openly about developing RV and camping sites on their land. To outsiders, it sounded random. To anyone who understands farming, it sounded calculated. Crops fail, markets swing. Weather doesn't care about effort. Diversification isn't a luxury, it's protection. And bringing people onto the land creates an income stream that doesn't depend on the same risks as livestock or harvest seasons. What made this move stand out wasn't just the idea itself, but the timing. This wasn't done from a place of comfort. It came after loss, uncertainty, and rebuilding. That tells you something about mindset. Instead of shrinking, Meredith leaned into adaptability. Of course, not everyone understood it. Some viewers questioned the shift. Others worried it would change the feel of the farm. But that reaction exposed a bigger truth. People often want creators to stay frozen in the version they first loved, even when real life demands evolution. For Meredith, this wasn't a pivot away from farming. It was a way to protect it, and it quietly confirmed something viewers had started to sense all along. She wasn't just documenting a lifestyle, she was building something meant to last. And that long-term thinking leads straight into the part of her story most people still overlook. The thing most people still don't notice about Meredith Bernard is that her success was never about aesthetics. It was about consistency. Long before the audience grew, she showed up the same way. On good days, exhausting days, and days when quitting would have been easier. That reliability is what quietly built trust, not perfectly framed shots. Meredith leaned into being perfectly imperfect, and that wasn't an accident. By showing unfinished projects, changing plans, and honest struggles, she created something rare online: believability. Viewers didn't feel like they were watching a character. They felt like they were watching real life unfold, without a filter pretending everything was under control. That approach also explains why her audience stayed through changes that normally break creators. Career shifts, family decisions, storms, new business ideas, none of it felt like a betrayal because it all fit the same narrative thread. Adapt, adjust, and keep going. What makes this even more interesting is how quiet the strategy was. There was no rebrand announcement, no dramatic reinvention, just steady evolution that mirrored real life. That's why her platform survived pressure that sinks others. In the end, Meredith didn't build a following by chasing trends or outrage. She built it by documenting reality and letting people decide what it meant to them. And that might be the most overlooked part of her entire story, because it proves she wasn't just sharing farm life. She was building resilience in public.